All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to our first stakeholder group meeting for Estacada's transportation system.
Sorry, John. Yeah, talk into the mic.
Let me shuffle. All right, better. All right. Well, once again, welcome and thank you for coming to our first stakeholder group meeting for Estacada's transportation system plan update. My name is John Bosket with DKS Associates, and I'm leading the consultant team helping the city and ODOT out with this project. And I'll just go over the agenda kind of really quickly before we get into everything. But I thought first we could just kind of go around the room and everybody could introduce themselves. And before I forget, I want to kind of prime you so you can think during the conversation here. Later in the meeting, when we get to talking about goals and objectives, I'm going to ask you some questions about what's important for you and the people that you represent as far as transportation improvements go, and what would you like to get out of this plan. So you can start thinking about that and taking notes so you're ready and I don't catch you off balance when we get there. So again, I'll just move to my left here. We'll go around the room and then we'll call on folks that are online. Oh, you're gonna need my mic.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Deering. I am assisting with the consultant group as well from DKS.
Afternoon, Alan Lashbrook with Estacada Fire.
Good afternoon, Valerie Renteria with the Estacada Community Center.
Hi, everybody. I'm Muna with Sandy Transit, Muna Rustum, Sandy Transit. And I'm also an Estacada resident.
I'm Ann Schweitzer Johnson with Todos Juntos, a community organization, nonprofit here in Estacada.
My name is Brent Dodrell. I'm the chair of the Parks and Rec Committee currently.
I'm Denise Carey. I'm just a resident.
Just a resident. Paul Strobel, City Council, also business owner and resident.
Elena Turpin, Assistant City Manager for the City of Estacada.
I'm Alan Wilson. I'm a city planner for City of Estacada.
I'm Mara. I am the Community Development Coordinator for the city.
And Taylor Campy, Community Development Director. And then I want to offer Dawn and is it Luke to also introduce yourselves. Just yell.
Don DeRoja, Public Works Director.
I'm Luke Spencer with Clackamas River Outfitters.
Taylor, you may be able to see the attendees list better than I can. You just call on individuals on Zoom there in whatever order you choose.
Alrighty, so let's go in order here. Dave Piper.
Yes, hi, I'm Dave Piper.
Trina Feldman.
Hi, I'm Trina Feldman. I'm with the DEIC committee.
Thanks, Trina. Sarah Lawson.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lawson. I'm the transportation coordinator for the Estacada School District.
Tara Perkins.
Hi, I'm Tara Perkins. I'm on the Estacada Planning Commission.
Avi Tayar.
Oops. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. Hi, this is Avi Tayar, Development Review Lead Engineering for ODOT.
Steve Williams.
Hi, I'm Steve Williams. I'm a principal transportation planner with Clackamas County.
Thank you, Steve. And Luke Norman.
Hi, I'm Luke Norman. I'm a service planner with TriMet.
Thanks, Luke. I think we got everybody. All right. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Okay, so if you've got a copy of the agenda, if you don't, if you're here in the room and you don't, we've got extra copies. You can raise your hand here and we'll get you one. But a lot of what we wanted to accomplish today, obviously, this is our kickoff meeting for the stakeholder group. So we want to get you introduced to the TSP update process. Explain what the TSP is, how does the city use it, why it's important, your role in this process, and kind of, how long this process will take, how many times we're going to meet, what we're thinking for broader public engagement. Again, what your role is in that. And then probably about half the agenda here, well, exactly half, hopefully right at 4 o'clock, we'll hit it. The big thing we want to talk about is the goals and objectives and evaluation criteria, which is item number 4 on the agenda. Because as we'll discuss later, that's really kind of a key kind of milestone early in the project that helps guide a lot of our work. And that's where I'll be asking you, what is it that is important for you and the folks that you represent about transportation? What do you want to see us accomplish as far as improvements in the transportation system over the next 20 years? It'll be in that part of the discussion. Any questions before I move on? That was also my opportunity to get a drink there. None. All right. I will try to remember to stop minimally at every one of these breaks here in the agenda and see if you've got any questions, but you can also ask as we go. So let's see, PowerPoint presentation. All right, you can go forward at least one slide. Let's see. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to go over here was kind of the introduction to what is the transportation system plan. What are we updating? How does the city use it? Why does this matter? Well, for one, you're required to have a transportation system plan by the state, and you do have one currently. I believe it was originally adopted in 2007, but there have been some updates or minor updates to it periodically. So this is a bit more of a significant update this time. And it is the extension of your comprehensive plan. So if you look at your comprehensive plan right now, there's probably some very vague policy language about transportation, but this is going to get into a fair amount more detail about, what is it that the city wants to accomplish? What types of projects, programs do you want to do over the next 20 years? So my second bullet says, this is a long range planning process where we'll be looking over a 20-year planning horizon. So go ahead to the next slide. So as far as why is there important, one reason is, a lot of the other agencies, whether it's, the county, ODOT, TriMet, state parks, they're all doing their own long range planning. And so this gives us an opportunity to involve all of those people and while you're doing your long range planning to make sure that we're staying coordinated with those, leveraging opportunities to kind of share resources, partner on projects and making sure that everything is cohesive. Also, as you've probably noticed, at times you do get growth in the community. I know there's been a fair amount more recently in Estacada with a lot of new development coming in. And it's important your transportation system plan, if you've got key transportation needs, key corridors that you need to make sure are set aside either to serve that growth or maybe even the land beyond it in the future. We need to make sure that those needs are identified in the TSP. If they're not, there's really not a lot of ability for the city to, require that development to work with, whatever framework they need or to set aside the property needed or even to build their part of those future improvements. And Taylor, I don't know if you want to also talk about, ways that the city uses the transportation system plan.
Sure. For example, in the case of subdivisions that we've had a lot of recently, with all the growth. Put the camera on me. When an applicant comes in proposing a subdivision, part of, where the TSP comes in is we will look at what connections does the TSP say we need to make sure occur in that part of the city. And so that will tell us not just what connection needs to be made, but what classification of street does that need to be in order to make sure that it's accommodating the the level of traffic that we're anticipating. And so that's just one example of how we use the TSP in a very that's been helpful a lot lately with all the growth that's happening. I don't know if you want to add on to that.
And I think, with more growth to come, I think it's very important for this project to make sure that we're kind of recalibrating what those needs are to make sure we get out in front of the next development coming. And especially as there's still a fair amount of land inside the urban growth boundary that hasn't been annexed in yet. This plan doesn't stay just within inside the city limits. We're going to plan through the urban growth boundary and get ahead of that as well. Next slide. Another reason they're important is one is for just, the city's own funding decisions. I mean, as I talked about before, hopefully if you're staying coordinated with your partnering agencies and you're talking with them, you can, cooperate on grant opportunities or, pool your own funds where there's projects that support common interests. Another thing we're going to do through this process is not just identify a bunch of projects, but also identify some priorities. So as resources become available, the city knows which ones are the most important for the community. And also, frankly, I know the city has been successful in getting grants in the past. If you don't have projects in your transportation system plan, that's almost always like a pass-fail criteria for grant funding. If it's not if you haven't shown a public commitment for support for that project, you're just not going to get the money. So again, it's very important for positioning for those future opportunities. Next slide. And again, we're going to talk about this quite a bit when we get into the goals and objectives. But another reason they're important is obviously a lot of investment goes into transportation facilities. And you also want to make sure that you're planning your transportation system in a way that it also supports a range of community values and goals. And I think often what you'll find is, there are a lot of common areas if you're doing broader community visioning or you're doing, housing studies as you have. You want really all of these things to align. There should be a lot of common interest when we look at all those different efforts, goals and objectives and what they're trying to accomplish. So we're not getting, crossways with another thing that's important in the community. Next slide. So as far as what they include, of course, I always encourage you to go back if you haven't already and look at the city's current transportation system plan. It'd be helpful, but generally what you're going to find is the common elements is the goals and objectives, which again, we're going to get to. That's a key part that we work on early in the project. It guides our work. We're going to use it to evaluate our work at some point and help us identify those priorities. And it can even be used, later by the city for, future decisions related to transportation, for consistency with the goals of the TSP. And then beyond that, key elements are you've got, modal plans. So for the major modes of transportation, whether it's walking, biking, driving and transit are typically the big four. So we'll look at what are the needs for each of those and modes of transportation. And standards, which I'll talk about in a second. Financing, again, some look at what are the funding streams that the city has for transportation and how much do we think we're going to have to spend on projects over the next 20 years. And then there's always some implementing, codes and ordinances, any policy changes in the comprehensive plan or new development code changes that we need to make to help implement the TSP, because the code and policy as it stands may have some gaps. I'll go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned before, we'll have plans for, the major modes of transportation. Again, looking out 20 years and what are the needs to kind of support development all through the urban growth boundary. Those could be, projects like, maybe street extensions or sidewalk infill where there's a gap. Or, if you participated in or saw the city's active transportation plan, which was just done a few years ago. There are a number of projects in there. A lot of them just improving existing streets, but to make it better for people walking and biking. It doesn't all have to be, concrete asphalt infrastructure projects. There could be, programs in there as well. Kind of on the pictures they're illustrating, it could be, safety and outreach, programs to, help educate, school children in this case, kind of how to safely ride bicycles. So we're not limited to purely infrastructure. Go on to the next one. Okay, so the standards I mentioned, these are kind of, I think of these as like tools to manage what you've got and also to guide how things should be designed in the future. And there's a few different elements of what we kind of put in the standard section. One is in the picture in the top right corner, street design standards. And so, for all the different classes of streets, whether it's an arterial or a collector or like a neighborhood local street, we need to identify what should that look like how wide do you want it to be and how much space do you want to dedicate for people that are, biking or walking or driving down the street. So we need to think about how would that typical facility, if it's just a neighborhood street versus, a major thoroughfare where we're going to have a lot more people moving, how do we want to use that space? It's important to know that because again, when future development comes in, they need to work with those parameters when they're building streets, or if the city's doing an improvement project, that's what they would be working on for that street if they wanted to upgrade it. Connectivity requirements for streets is also an important one. And a lot of that just has to do with making sure that, in the future, we're not building a lot of dead end streets, which makes it, trips a lot longer, whether it's for, emergency services or, just increasing the amount of vehicle miles that people are driving. Has a big impact on people that are walking and biking because they're obviously a lot more sensitive to a few extra blocks and adding that distance to their trip. Standards to limit congestion. Congestion is always, relative in every community as to how bad congestion is. But, every community sets, thresholds generally called mobility standards to how much congestion they're willing to accept. Because, at some point, if you, I guess, I don't know if it's lowering the bar or raising the bar. If you want zero congestion at all, what you might find is you may end up spending a tremendous amount of money on projects to relieve congestion, and you may end up with, much bigger streets and intersections than you want because that's now going to compete with, maybe comfortable you walking and biking, or you may just be investing a lot more money in that than you think you need to. So we got to kind of find that right balance of what kind of fits the community's desire. And neighborhood traffic management's another one. So providing guidance for where it may or may not be appropriate for traffic calming devices in neighborhoods if you have problems with, cut through or speeding in neighborhoods. Go ahead to the next slide. And I mentioned funding before. A very important part of the plan is, again, we need to project out, how much money do we think the city will have to spend on all these great projects? And I don't want to spoil it for you. I don't want to shock you later either. The outcome will always be we'll have way more, money in projects that we want to do than we can actually pay for the next 20 years. It happens every time. So that's why prioritization is important. We need to kind of see of all the projects that we come up with, we'll have some kind of, planning level estimates on what the cost may be. And part of the conversation is going to be is which kind of package of projects fits our budget that we want to set forward as that priority. It's called the financially constrained list of projects. So that is definitely an important exercise here. And that's kind of something we like to communicate also when we go out to the public, later in the project, we say, hey, there's all these great projects, which ones do you like? We also try to pair that with kind of that reality discussion of like, yeah, but you're only going to have $7 million or whatever the number is. So they can kind of mentally budget as they're making their choices. Go ahead to the next slide. So to the process for this TSP update, here we are. We're already in the summer of 2022. We started in the spring and we're aiming to be done by fall of 2023. There's kind of three major phases. If you see the big boxes in the top of that schedule, called the understand in the blue header, and the evaluate in the green, and then the recommended adopt in orange. So generally what we're doing in the first few months here through the fall in the understand stage is, we want to know, what does the transportation system look like now? What works well, what doesn't? What is it that people want to change about it or accomplish over the next 20 years? And that'll include, us looking out, here's how things look today, with, an assumed amount of growth over the next 20 years. How are some of those barriers maybe the same or different? What kind of issues have we added that need to be addressed? And then as we transition to the evaluate stage, that's where we develop some solutions to address those needs. That's where we get into, all the stuff that I mentioned before, and projects and programs and standards and looking at funding. And then there's obviously kind of a feedback loop involved where people tell us what they think about stuff we're putting forward, and we integrate that feedback into the updated versions. And then when we've got all that, we transition into the last stage. The recommended adopts, we'll put that into the draft updated plan. And we will go forward through the public hearings process. And so below the big boxes, you can see there's some circles on there. So we've got S's and D's and C's, and we've got diamonds with W's in them. So that's kind of showing our public involvement process, how that kind of is going to be carried out between now and the fall of 2023. And so you guys are the S's. That's our stakeholder group. And I'll get into a little bit more in a minute, more detail on kind of what your role is. So you're meeting 4 times in this process, 2 in this understand phase. So, the next time that we meet, we'll have our documentation of what it is that we're seeing is kind of what's working well, maybe what's not, where we're seeing some gaps, safety issues, things like that. But we need to pair that also with what you're telling us. If we got something wrong, or if we miss something entirely, that's a big part of why we bring this out to the public, is to complete the picture. And then the D's right underneath you, that's the city's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I'll talk about kind of their role in this also, but we're meeting with them kind of at the same stages, kind of specifically talking about our project and using kind of the equity lens. They're helping us with that. And then we have the C's. We have some city council briefings along the way. We've got 3 of them in there, just to give them updates on where we're at and what we're hearing from folks. And it's an opportunity for them to kind of help steer us along the way. And then 2 community workshops are the W's and the diamonds there. So the big milestones there are the kind of the end of our understand stage. So after the next time we meet with you, and again, a lot of what we'll be talking about there, it's that same conversation about, well, for them, it'll really be a kickoff, and here's what's going on with the project, but also, what we're seeing are some of the needs and gaps, and getting them their input on that and what kinds of solutions they would be interested in having us look at. And then the next time we meet with them is when we'll have some draft ideas, and we'll get feedback on that to kind of see which ones are really popular, or if we missed anything that needs to get incorporated. And then course, the big box at the bottom of that says ongoing community outreach to our project website, which I think is the next slide on here. Like, no, it's not the next slide. I'm in the wrong section. But we have a project website, which the URL for that will be on here. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But that's something that anybody can use at any time throughout this project to kind of see where we're at and provide comments. Go ahead to the next slide. So again, the stakeholder group roles and responsibilities. Again, while we would love to get everyone in the community engaged at a high level, that's really hard to do on a project like this, especially when you're doing long range planning. It's a lot different when there's a project on the street right in front of their house. Everybody gets very engaged at that point. Sometimes long range planning, maybe they don't quite understand what it is or how they fit into this. So it takes kind of a lot of effort to really kind of get people engaged. Well, we will certainly do our best. But you are really our community representatives. And we've kind of assembled this group also to try to attempt to kind of reflect a kind of a range and diversity of interests to try to kind of get all of the voices in the room, so to speak. And so if you can see the diagram there, it's a little bit far away from here. So you're really our main advisory body throughout this process. As I mentioned before, we're also using the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, but really kind of more specifically to just apply that equity lens as far as our process goes for outreach and getting people engaged in this project, but then also the outcomes that they're seeing in the TSP. Whereas really what we're looking for kind of, all topics really with this group. And then city council, of course, is the, real decision-making body. They'll be the ones adopting the plan. But, also, as far as just being those community representatives in this process, well, hopefully we can have you just be our project advocates and help us get the word out about the project, with kind of folks in your sphere. And if you're representing a kind of different parts of the community, hopefully you've got your kind of different outlets can help us, direct people to the project website, let them know, just what the project is, how they can get engaged. It's even great, if you attend the community workshops. And I've had, stakeholder group members in the past, they'll come and help out the workshops, whether that's just greeting people and signing them in, or sometimes they just, will stand at one of the posters and just listen to people and kind of, make sure they're understanding other people's perspectives. So would love to have your help in those ways as well. And really, again, our goal is, when we're going to city council, especially for adoption, we want to be able to say that, our stakeholder group, fully supports the plan. So again, we're really, really looking to you for kind of advice and direction throughout the way. Before I go to the public outreach process, anyone have any questions on any of that? Yes.
Back to the 101 portion that you did here. How often does the city do a TSP? Last one was 07 for us with some updates. How often should we do this process here?
It varies. If I had to pick an average, I'd say maybe 10 years. But a lot of it's going to be driven by how much has changed in your community. For some communities where not much has happened and maybe they haven't been really, successful in getting funding for a lot of projects, it could go, I've seen some go closer to 15 years. Rarely does it go more than that. But if a lot has happened in your community, it could go the other way, right? Or if you've been very successful in getting projects done, I've seen some communities, rip through them in 6 years or something, either because they've got a ton of growth, they've built a bunch of stuff, and they said, we just have to recalibrate and redo this.
And then that's kind of part two is the recalibration process. What spurs that on? What kind of leeway does a city have in making changes to this?
I would say the main things that maybe spur kind of a refocus right on what you're doing in your plan. One is growth, right? Because when we do our 20-year projections, we're obviously making our best guess at what's going to happen, but it doesn't always happen that way. It may happen a lot faster sometimes than you think. So that's one reason. Another can be, sometimes community values can change. Probably not year to year, but if it's been 10, 15 years, I've definitely seen that. I've seen communities where, 15 years ago, maybe they didn't care about a certain mode of transportation. They didn't really want to talk about it. They want all the money to go to this. You talk to them today, they feel very different about it. And so the goals and objectives that you see in their plan may change compared to the last one. And probably, the focus on what they're choosing to invest in, right, as far as the mix of projects could be very different as well.
Thank you.
Anyone online, make sure we don't miss you. Assume, do you have the hand raise function? All right, make sure to raise your hand if you have something to you want to jump in online. All right, what is my next slide?
Duty calls?
Yeah, I got a brush fire.
Oh, no.
All right, so the public outreach process. Check myself on time really quickly. Wow, I'm almost right on. So hopefully you got some of the documents sent to you already. One of those would have been the public stakeholder and outreach, or I'm sorry, public and stakeholder involvement strategy memo. And I know we also sent out just the meeting minutes from the first meeting we had with the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. So I just kind of wanted to go over a little bit on what we heard from the DEI committee, just so you know, we're staying coordinated. And then also kind of explain what that public involvement, public stakeholder involvement strategy is. And then certainly get any advice or input you've got to offer on what we should be doing to engage the community in this project. So from the DEI committee, just have a couple of slides on that. Some of the things that we heard, and it's kind of pulling out highlights from the meeting summary of what was important to them. We heard that there's concern about how growth, which we've talked about, a lot of growth has been happening. It's increasing infrastructure needs and how that cost is then impacting existing residents. So we definitely heard concerns over affordability for folks maybe on fixed incomes or been living in town for a long time. And then, yes, Estacada also, we looked at some census data with that group also to kind of just get a little bit of a backdrop on kind of the makeup of the community. And one of the things that, stood out was the Estacada, like many places, has an aging population. And a lot of, the growing number of folks that have mobility challenges. And then we got some comments that folks wanted to make sure we had a diversified, investments and the types of projects that get funded. And then somebody mentioned also that sustainability was a key interest. Go ahead to the next slide. And then as far as, some direction for us or advice on, how to carry out our public engagement. We talked about sharing information through Spanish speaking church, food bank, library, specifically the preschool program. Mailing postcards and using, we talked about Face Group and maybe using Nextdoor. Somebody mentioned the format of the housing meeting and What's Up Estacada was effective at getting people to engage. And Taylor, having not been there, what was that format that they liked?
Yeah, so those are two different events, but I think the housing meeting that they were talking about was the open house that we held, where we had some display boards set up around the room. There was a very brief presentation and then a kind of Q&A opportunity. So it was sort of a combo of, presentation and discussion and that open house format where people can walk around and see the information, talk with staff and consultants about the the project. So yeah, and that had great engagement. And then our What's Up Estacada events are a quarterly event series that's just kind of an informal opportunity for members of the public, agency representatives, local community groups, and our committee members and elected officials to talk about what's up in Estacada. And so that would be, those events would be a great opportunity for us to include some engagement around this project also.
So those were both in person.
And those are both in person, yep, in this room.
And then they want us to make sure we're providing a variety of ways for people to give feedback, not just kind of one pipeline that may not work well for everyone. Somebody said, hey, we don't want to hear at the end of the project that people didn't feel like they had a chance to be heard. And so it's definitely a goal set for us there. Some advice: we need to communicate why each project has been selected and what its purpose is. I think that was helpful feedback. And then use common language that everyone can understand, and explain why this project is important and the value of individual participation. Which I know we worked some of that advice into our website content for folks. That was really good input. Go ahead to the next slide. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the DEI committee meeting? We'll be meeting with them again, and it's certainly our goal is we'll be sharing with each of these groups, what's gone on in the various committees. So hopefully everybody's kind of up to speed. So the public and stakeholder involvement strategy document. In short, if you look through there, it's basically our playbook for our public engagement process. I kind of explained the highlights when we're looking at that process chart, but obviously to carry it out, there's a bit more detail that we need to kind of make sure that the consultant team and the city folks kind of understand the plan of attack, and so you can kind of see in more detail what's involved there. It includes engagement goals, key messages, kind of like, we got from the DEI committee, kind of giving us some advice on messaging. The decision-making process we talked about, lists of key stakeholder groups, proposed outreach tools and processes, communication protocols, and evaluation criteria. Because actually it's kind of part of our looking at this whole process, from an equity lens. Again, as I mentioned before, part of it is just looking at the process of updating the TSP and have we done that, in a way that's promoting equity. But then also it's looking at the outcomes that are in the TSP, and are they going to promote that as well? So again, just how we're doing our public outreach is a key part of that. So some of the key outreach tools that have been proposed and that we plan on using. We've got our project webpage. We've got our DEI committee that's helping us out, the stakeholder group, our city council briefings. We've got a small youth outreach task where we want to provide some educational materials and feedback opportunities through either the library or the schools. There'll be a project flyer that's coming out probably fairly soon. We want to make sure we had a lot of good stuff for people to look at and comment on, and we sent out that first flyer. That'll go out through the community and hopefully get posted in a lot of different places around the community, in addition to maybe just being mailed out, and in our community workshops as well. And then next slide. And so you'll see in there, it's got just what are the goals for public involvement. So there are 4 goals. We're just building awareness of the process by describing the benefits and opportunities for public participation, being inclusive of traditionally underrepresented and transportation disadvantaged populations, as well as non-residents who rely on Estacada's transportation system. So looking a little bit, beyond just the city boundaries. Use the transportation process to foster a positive relationship while building trust and creating ownership of outcomes, and gather ideas, local knowledge, and feedback about problems and potential solutions. And I already mentioned how the DEI committee is helping us out, but before I move on kind of from this step, I would certainly like to invite any thoughts or advice you all have on what you think would be, kind of effective for us to incorporate into our public outreach process. And what can we do that you think will be really helpful in getting the word out and getting people involved?
I don't know that I have any great ideas, but been involved in the process of trying to get community input in Estacada for a number of years. So it is great to have a goal that at the end, we don't hear that, well, we didn't know how to participate. Let's not set that goal too high. That will always be what people say, because we try to get input. And you said it very well. People really don't give input for 20 years. They give input when their street is being torn up in front of them. So I think it's a noble goal, and I think you have a lot of great ways to communicate it, but I think, John, you've done this a while, so you'll hear that at the end probably.
I have realistic expectations, yes, but certainly I think, yeah, at the end of the day, I think we need to feel good about our process and that we did, a reasonable job at that. Now, I have a community center representative here, don't I? What could we do, I guess, for or through the community center?
A couple of different things. We have social media website. We have newsletter that we send out to our members. Well, actually beyond our members. So probably 300 people. They live inside and outside of Estacada city limits. So it's not just Estacada residents, but transportation for the community center impacts outlying areas. So when you're talking about some of those outlying areas, it's elderly and disabled in our community that we sometimes provide transportation to get to Estacada so they can get the transportation that they need to go to a medical appointment or go, for dialysis or things like that. So, we have some methods that we use internally, but social media is, I think, a big one to leverage. Also, I think the school district, I don't know if there's a representative from the school district, they have a wonderful flyer template that gets blasted out. And I always see those messages, either via email notification or something that shows up on social media.
Maggie Kelly is the communications director at the Estacada School District, and she would do things like that to post things on what they call peach jars, just the flyer software that they use. But that's a good place to send a message to all the families in the school district. I also, with Todos Juntos, we do have a lot of interaction with our Spanish-speaking families in the community, and we're always looking for ways to reach out to those communities here in Estacada and in the surrounding areas. And I think I want to be sure that they're represented in these conversations and have access to the information in their home language. So we'll work really hard to help facilitate that as much as we're able, but the city, also needs to look out for those opportunities. Because there's probably a larger percentage of the population that do rely on public transportation that might not have the 2-car family that need to have access from where they are to get to the main arteries of transportation on TriMet and such. So that's something that I will, pledge to help with as best we can to get that message out. And also to hear back. We want to be able to get the feedback from people that are using transportation that have struggles with that. And also just access from these building and growing neighborhoods. They're going to be a couple, 2, 3, 4 miles away from the main artery of getting on TriMet or getting access to the existing plans. So how do we as a city address that? Just getting to transportation, as you mentioned, Valerie, for our elderly and for people that don't have a second car or third car.
For the community center, how frequent is your newsletter?
Monthly.
Monthly, okay. Great.
And our population is, some of them, a lot of them actually in the outlying areas don't have access to internet. So trying to get that information to that population is sometimes challenging.
Well, as we start planning our first kind of outreach efforts, I mean, we'll certainly be reaching out to you both to see how we can kind of partner. Thank you. Yes.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure if I saw it on there or not, but Estacada News as well, the local newspaper. And I think they've been doing a better and better job of getting stuff into social media feeds as well too. I get plenty through email, through Twitter, through Facebook, just updates from Pamplin Media. Anything hashtag Estacada pops up.
No hands online. Hope I can see them from here.
Any of our Zoom participants want to chime in here? Feedback on ideas or advice for Steve? Can you unmute yourself, Steve?
Yeah, thank you. We are at the county are just finishing up a TSP process for Damascus. As you may have heard, we inherited Damascus a few years ago, and they did not have a transportation plan. And so this is the first transportation system plan for the area of Damascus. And one of the things we did nearly the entire plan during the pandemic. And one of the things that we learned out of that is the value of regular, low intensity contacts with people via email, via the website, via social media. What we found was that putting out a very short questionnaire every couple of weeks, where we ask a couple of questions about their concerns or their interests, that really helped us build engagement with the community over the course of time. And it was actually very easy for us to do. And it also ended up getting us a lot of information that really worked in our planning process. And so I would suggest that you can do that kind of outreach with little effort and little expense. And there are big benefits in doing that, both in terms of the plan that you develop, but also the way it brings your community together around those planning issues.
All right, thanks. I like that idea. Just realized, Mark, I had one slide left on my public outreach process. I cut short. It was the website that I promised you. I didn't show the next one. There you go. So you can write that down. It is already up. That is www.cityofestacada.org/TSP. So it's already there. And on that website, there's just a little intro on the project. There's that process diagram that I showed you to kind of get people kind of quickly engaged in what this is and what the timeline looks like. But also you can go on there and you can sign up to get on a mailing list. So if we wanted to send out some notices of upcoming meetings, ask questions periodically, we can do that through the mailing list. There's a place to submit comments so people can tell us all of the things that they love or don't love about the transportation system. Anytime, they don't have to wait until we get to the first big milestone. They can engage with that anytime they like, and we'll take those. Any of the project documents that we're producing, like the ones that we're going through today and got sent to you, those will be posted up there on the website so people can see those as well. We have on there, anybody can request anything in Spanish if they would like. So hopefully that works and people see that and feel that they can request that.
And the website, you can translate the entire website to Spanish. There's a drop-down option for translation for several languages.
So yeah, that's like I said, it's already up and active. So we haven't pushed out, at least as far as I know, maybe the city did and I didn't know, but we haven't really pushed out any big kind of advertisement to everybody to tell them it's there. But that's coming soon. So again, that's maybe handy, as you're running into people, talking with them, you can direct them towards that. That's probably the best way to really kind of stay plugged in and follow the process.
I'd love to comment. So, our business is in the business of tourism. And I don't know what you guys are doing to engage that side of transportation and whatnot. But I'd be interested to know more about how you're engaging that side of the transportation. But I would say, tourism can be, it has its pluses and minuses in regards to transportation. It can be wonderful and it brings lots of funds in and stuff like that, but it can also create problems or things that sometimes folks that live here in this town in regards to transportation, parking, that sort of thing, don't really appreciate so much. And so I'm not sure who you're engaging on that side of things, but I would be interested in knowing. Most of our information for our business, comes through like the chamber and that sort of thing. So yeah, I would just throw it out there that just the interest in finding out how you're engaging that part of the transportation plan.
Yeah, I think that's still an open conversation or issue as far as how to reach out to that particular group. Obviously, it's a harder kind of group to get input from, right? Because they're not going to be watching the Estacada TSP. Generally, you get outside the community. Like I said, Chamber of Commerce. I know in the past, we probably got input from Travel Oregon on things like that. I think it's part of the reason you're involved in here as well. And I think any advice or input you've got on avenues for connecting with those folks.
Yeah, I think
love to hear it.
Yeah, Travel Oregon and Mount Hood Territory, they're working on all that sort of thing as well. I know it's, I've heard conversations from other cities like Salem and outlying areas, Corvallis, about transportation and parking issues and how to get people out here, but not have, 10 people driving 10 cars to get to the local spot where it's just jammed up, and then the locals can get there because, so I think that's a big part of this conversation as well, beyond just like the local side of it, because it really impacts like the local feel and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
But like I said, I think that's still an open conversation as far as how to best do that. But no, you raised I think an important issue. That is a important aspect of the community and transportation needs, and that we want to try to capture this as well. I will go to the next slide. 5 minutes ahead of time. I was on the way out here, I was listening to a podcast on building effective teams, and as part of what they're talking about was apparently the proximity that team members are sitting within plays a big factor in that. The closer the people sat, the more productive they were and the more collaborative. We got set up for this, and I thought, man, the deck's stacked against us already here, but you're doing great. And our next challenge is ahead of us here. It's going to hopefully get a little bit more interactive. And as we get into the goals and objectives discussion, this is, definitely where I want to hear from you again. It's, what is it that you want to see accomplished in this plan, and from a transportation standpoint, what's important to kind of fix and get done? Because while looking at lists of goals and objectives isn't always easy to understand, what does all of this mean? How does it come into play? At the end of the day, it should, in one way or the other, reflect exactly what I was asking. Is it should reflect the things you think are important and what you want to accomplish. So the goals and objectives, I've got this memo I'm looking at, so hopefully you got a chance to take a look through this. again, how we use this in a couple of different ways. I mean, one is we're, identifying issues as we're developing potential solutions. We're referring back to these because again, this is what we're assuming is kind of the snapshot of what's important to accomplish and achieve in this community over the next 20 years. And what, we want the future to look like. And then as we do that, and again, I mentioned at some point, we're going to, share all the projects that we've come up with, but then we get community feedback. And also as part of that, we're going to kind of look back and reflect on the goals and objectives and say, well, how do we think these projects we came up with align with these? Are they meeting them well? Are they really, is there a big gap where we've missed something? And also kind of use these to help us prioritize those projects. And then, the city can even use those down the road, if there's decisions to be made related to transportation. This should also be used as a guide that those decisions should be consistent with the goals and objectives of the TSP. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So as we transition into that, if you got a chance to look through, the draft that we put together, kind of where this came from, we looked at the goals and objectives from your 2007 TSP, and we pulled a lot of stuff in from that. I know I was involved in your active transportation plan from a few years ago, and well, I don't think it had specifically goals and objectives. There were some things from that we pulled in. There were other things like the downtown plan that I think did have some goals and objectives and kind of borrowed from that as well. And some of these also, there's also a little bit of mix of other issues that, in the last, let's say 5 to 10 years have just been extremely common in all communities. And so we've kind of hopefully put the compilation of the best of all of that in here. But that doesn't mean that we can't change it. I just wanted to, kind of the background on where that came from. So as I kind of get into here, just would kind of like to go around the room and know, like, again, what is important to you from or the, folks that you represent related to transportation. What would you like to see done? And I will just move around. I'm going to skip Amanda. She doesn't get a vote in this, but since Alan's not here, Valerie, you're up first.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry. Should we pull up is this where we
yes.
want to pull up a Word document just so that everyone can see we're keeping track of that?
Thank you. That's exactly where.
And then I also I'm noticing we're at about the halfway mark. If folks need to get up and use the restroom, it is down the hall and to the left. Please feel free to go ahead and do that if you need to. And we're out of water bottles. If anyone needs a water bottle, tap me on the shoulder. I'll help you out.
Okay, I think for us, representing the Estacada Community Center, where primarily our clients are older, elderly, disabled. We provide little transportation through our shuttle bus to shuttle folks into our community center for activities, lunch, exercise, social interaction, things like that. However, during the pandemic, we were closed for the last 2 years. We shifted priorities and began using the bus to offer services like shopping for seniors, where we would do the shopping and make deliveries. We bus them in for medical appointments, to go to a clinic, to go to physical therapy, to go to a doctor's office. We've shuttled them as far as Portland, the VA hospital, to go to appointments. We identified that there is a big need. Once word got around that we were doing this for our Meals on Wheels clients and for clients that the center serves, we began to get phone calls. Well, I'm disabled. I need help getting from here to here. I'm older. I need help from getting from here to here. We don't have the resources to help all the people that call us. And there's a bit of a disconnect in that many of our folks live in rural communities. To even get them into town to catch service bus to go somewhere is mainly, I think, a huge need for some of our residents. So we're actively looking for a grant to get a car so we can help support those medical rights now that we're open again and we're using our shuttle bus to shuttle folks in for center activities. We've set aside 2 days a week to do medical appointments, and it doesn't even cover the need.
Does TriMet provide some kind of service that, it seems like I've seen something out here before.
Yeah, so TriMet will cover, we have somebody that we bring in for dialysis. They live out of district. So if they don't have a family member, somebody to help them, they call us. We will go get them, bring them in to the TriMet stop. TriMet picks them up and takes them the rest of the way. So that's quite common.
So we have a TriMet representative, right? So you would only pick people up that request that service from a bus stop. You don't go to their houses, their homes.
Yeah, so TriMet provides a mix of service. There's the fixed route service along line 30, which provides service from Estacada to the Clackamas Town Center. Then there's the lift service within, I believe it's a quarter mile of line 30 that provides service to people who aren't able to access the fixed route. But it sounds like from this description, there's some people who are living further away from line 30 and then they're using other transit service or local service to get where they need to go.
But that's nice to know because the 30, has a lot of stops along Eagle Creek Road, so a quarter of a mile either direction.
So mostly it's just the outlying areas. It's not the city. It's not the city limits. I mean, for the most part, even folks within city limits, we provide transportation to, but the main need is those folks that cannot get to the city to take transportation. Especially for elderly and disabled. I don't know about other folks that might one-car households and things like that, but. And then the other thing is education comes up quite often where I guess folks get a discount on their insurance when they're elderly. If they've taken an education course.
AARP.
Yeah, AARP, sometimes they can get assistance through AARP, but there's not a rep in our area for that. So maybe, exploring some other education office opportunities other than AARP for these folks to be able to accomplish that would be great.
Is that like a safe driving course?
Yeah, safe driving course.
Okay. I think AAA does some of that.
Oh, that might be an option. Yeah. It might just be awareness around what's available to.
All right. I can't see your name. Was it Luke?
Yeah, it is Luke.
All right.
Yeah, I think for like recreation and tourism, standpoint, kind of evaluating that peak season traffic flow. And then also looking at modes of transportation to bring folks out here, like alternative modes that aren't like driving a car for every person. And, also trying to offer transportation to get, underserved communities out here to do recreation in this area. And, I think for us that from my standpoint, what we see seems like the biggest concerns, you don't want it to become Highway 26, right?
All right.
I see Trina's got her hand raised on Zoom. You want to unmute Trina?
Yeah, we have a few disabled people in our community that are in wheelchairs or visually impaired. And they've got some great ideas that are just little stuff like a crosswalk that makes noise so you know when it's going, and little stuff. Maybe we can speak to one of the disabled people and see what they have. Some great ideas. I just don't know them all, but they have some great ideas. And so maybe speaking with them, we can get some ideas.
And I forgot to mention the crosswalk where the light is in town. our only light right now. Sometimes that's not long enough for disabled people to scooter across. And it's very scary watching cars get close to them. So that crosswalk is a bit of a challenge. I personally witnessed a couple of close calls.
Right.
And it might be being fixed now, I don't know.
I actually think that's a really bad spot. I don't walk slow and I've almost been hit several times because people don't even pay attention, so. But my thoughts too go to public transit because that's what I do. And I know that it would be great to have more opportunity for the elderly and disabled in the community. They don't have enough service. We have our own dial-a-ride program in Sandy that we take people to their medical appointments anywhere in the Portland metro area. We have dedicated drivers for that. And then we have drivers that provide door-to-door service so they can go get shopping and so things like that. And then when I think of tourism, I think of like Mount Hood Express. They put bike trailers on the back of their buses. They have ski boxes for the winter, which obviously wouldn't be useful for us. But I think of things like, what if there's some kind of adaptation for kayaks and paddle boards?
Yeah.
I just want to give kudos to Sandy Transportation. You guys have saved us. I actually live in Sandy and there's, a period of time where we had 6 months of only one car and trying to get my husband to Gresham and being 2 miles out of town, we were just stuck. So you guys have the dial-a-ride program. You have a get a ride to Sandy. You've got the SAM bus, which brought us all the way to Estacada for $1. My daughter and I had to come to school and work every day. And you saved us with those small things, helping people access from outside just the narrow quarter-mile corridor, right? So Estacada doesn't have that yet, but that's something that I'm glad you're here because I think that model could be really helpful.
Well, I'm glad we can help you.
Yes,
So.
thank you.
I see 2 new hands on Zoom. I think Dave Piper was first and then Luke.
Thank you. As I think in terms of generalities with any future plan relating to transportation, I'd hate to see us, I don't want to say ignore, but not take into account technological changes. And the specific element that comes to my mind, and there must be many, many more, are electric cars. We're not going to be using gas cars extensively in the future. Estacada is significantly removed from the major population centers, and there may be some aspects of our transportation plan that need to take into account the development and significant increase in use for electric vehicles. That's just an example. There may be plenty of other technological changes that can be evaluated and considered in a future TSP.
Thanks, Dave.
Welcome.
How about Luke next?
Awesome, thank you. For TriMet, I think one of our goals is making sure there's more accessible stops, meeting the ADA requirements, and having sidewalks to them and safe crossings to make it easier for more people to reach our service.
Awesome, thank you. And Tara Perkins?
Hi, yeah, one of the things that comes up a lot in the planning commissions is in the planning commission meetings and talking about all the new subdivisions is concern about how all of this is going to interface with the highway. As it was said, we definitely don't want it to become Highway 26 in the high season, but I think we're with the amount of growth we have and all of these people moving in and people who are going to need to be doing shopping and working and stuff that more or less requires leaving Estacada. The highway is bound to get harder to navigate, harder to be on for local errands. And of course, the highway and it is to some extent out of our jurisdiction. It's a state highway, but it would be great to, I mean, we can't address transportation in Estacada without addressing the highway, really. And finding a way that we can have an organized approach to dealing with the state around safety and expansion and adding lights or whatever it is that we need to do, and having that information be communicated to the public would be great, because I think there's a lot of, you know, part of the online chit chat about growth and stuff is a lot of too, and the general public, not just the planning commission, is a lot of concern about the highway and parts of the highway that are not in good repair, and the highway during emergencies. Yeah, I just think it'd be good to find a way to address that and communicate that.
Thanks, Tara. Anybody else in the room or the Zoom? Denise?
I got a chance to share earlier, so what our priorities would be for our Todos Juntos organization.
So speaking on behalf of Parks and Rec, one of the things in the Estacada Park Master Plan is a trail system that kind of interconnects the city. And the city is expanding to the north. So the Parks and Rec team is looking at trying to make sure there's some sort of potential way to bike and or walk from the north of town all the way down to the river. So I think that would need to be included. Related also is the width of streets in developments where there's going to be a park. That's already become an issue for us. People want parks in a community, but the development that went in really doesn't allow for really good access to the park or even on-street parking. So I know a lot of that is probably water under the bridge already with developments already planned. I guess one of the other hats I wear is concerning the Chamber of Commerce at this point. And I agree with Luke on accommodating for whatever that would mean for tourism, because we see that as an even more impact on Estacada in a positive way. And so however that relates to signage, particularly along the main highway into town and even Eagle Creek Road, I think could be an asset to tourism. This is probably beyond the scope of our TSP, but related to tourism is also the development of that Springwater Trail that's been in plan for years and years and years. So that people could actually walk and or bike all the way from downtown Portland into Estacada. So however that connects with this plan, I think would be important.
Denise.
I just have kind of more general things. I think in looking at our current plan, we've had a lot of development to the north, and our current plan didn't really, wasn't very complete in that area. So a lot of assumptions had to be made, and we had to move some collectors. And I think this plan, we just need to be sure we're looking at what the use of that property is and where collectors might be needed, and kind of maybe take a look more at the topography. So we aren't putting one where it obviously can't go. I don't know if with 2007 that was done, because and I realize that just because it shows it on a map doesn't mean it has to be exactly there. But I think we, in the growth we've had, we kind of left that area. That area just had nothing up there. And, you know, for the first 15 years, it was fine. But the last 5 years, that's where all the growth has been. And another thing is our connections to Highway 224. We have the mill property that is for sale and rezoned for mixed use. They already have an access to 224. We also have down by the ODOT property close to River Mill. We already have an access there onto Robert Taylor's property onto 224. And so, looking at how those can connect, maybe a frontage road, so cars will be able to access both of those from the mill property, because there is quite a few acreage of mill property that is still outside the city limits between those two properties that I would imagine would eventually annex in and become, I think the mill property is 130 acres, but not all of it is inside the city. And so how is that going to look? This where Maine comes onto the highway is not adequate. There was a beautification project a few years ago where they were going to take the turn away, the left turn into Broadway, but then they left it, but there's no turn lane anymore. So you're just sitting there in this little area to turn. So I think just ODOT has regulations on how close your stoplights have to be. So how do we get around that? And, I know it's a big highway, but I'm from Woodland, and going there's big areas, big roads that have roundabouts that, you can get on the highway. And so maybe roundabouts are our answer. I don't know. The right of way is really large, but I think we need to take a look at all those entrances onto the highway that is eventually going to have a lot of traffic, because when that mill property sells and develops, there's a plan for a school up there, and it's going to have a lot of traffic coming out. So how I think that's important to be sure we have those. And then also the one going to Malala here, during certain times of the year, it backs up a lot down back towards Malala from that. So what can we do there? Can there be a light there? How far away? So those kind of, to consider those types of things. And then also the neighborhood traffic management. We have a lot of people asking for speed bumps. So I'm hoping there's criteria in there that, because I don't think people understand that streets with hills and streets with curves aren't good areas for speed humps. But coming from me, who knows, I'm not an engineer, but I think if we have those kind of criteria in there, so we can point those out, because the city has nothing right now for that. And I have a lot more, but those are my main couple that we just work on the classifications of roads and be sure we're allowing for. It kind of goes to the width of road. If there's going to be a park planned in a certain place, which we never know, but it should be on, the larger collectors and instead of the neighborhood streets.
As going back to the kind of people that we could be keeping in the loop on things or making sure we're working with, the city is in the process of putting together a public safety and transportation committee as well too. They would be a good one once we get that up and running to be working with. And great input from everyone so far. I really appreciate hearing this from a city council standpoint, trying to think back to so many council meetings and things that come up here. There are some key things. I mean, we're annexing in so much property now to the city that is very likely to be developed. And we've got some key areas on the outer portions of the urban growth boundary that are difficult access points. But we're going to have subdivisions right off of those. One area in particular is Lawrence Road, and it's got a pretty strong curve in it. How do we, or can we address places like that? And I would say on general standpoint, just the outer edges of the urban growth boundary would be things that we could look at. I think we've got a good partnership with Clackamas County and ODOT now, just that we can continue to keep that going. And as we have future plans for growth in the city, and then just access in and out of subdivisions. When I moved here 10 years ago, I live up behind the school, and we are just now getting a second access point to that subdivision. So for 10 years, we've been living with just that one input there. So access in and out, the standards for subdivisions as well too. I loved hearing that. What size streets, if there's a park in there, those are great suggestions. And then one thing that I keep wondering about, we've got streets listed as, and I don't know the words, collectors and different things. Are those still appropriate? We've had so much growth here since the last one was done. Should we reassess what street is a collector, what street is a whatever arterial?
Neighborhood.
Yeah. So things along those lines, and then just overall safety concerns. I do a lot of walking, so I really enjoy hearing some of the proposed things that could be coming around the city as well too, for access for pedestrians and bicyclists too. I guess that's my stuff.
Great, and I saw a hand on the Zoom that I don't see anymore, but was it Sarah Lawson? Did you want to add something?
Yeah, coming from the district standpoint and the fact that I run the transportation department, I wanted to echo the access to the highways, both 224 and 211. Having the buses having to turn out onto the road, onto the highways to get to other areas of the community is becoming a lot harder. And so safety as access to the both highways would be an important thing for us. Also, the size of the roads in the subdivisions is another one that I wanted to echo. Trying to get the buses through when there's cars parked on both sides, it just can't happen. And so the idea of just making sure that the roads are accessible, and it's not just the school buses, but we have to have emergency vehicles get into those places too. And without enough room, it won't happen. So we just want to look at the safety of transporting our students would be our biggest point.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oosh.
So anybody?
I just had one quick comment.
Yeah.
You mentioned signage for tourists, but even for locals, there's a lot of signage in this area that doesn't exist, is incorrect, or is covered by a tree. And the locals know to expect that. But if you're an emergency vehicle driver, if you're a bus driver, if you can't find places, you can't find the people that you're supposed to pick up, because it's just, old and there are a lot of trees. So just to put that out there, it'd be nice if we could find our way around the community, especially for tourism in the local, like the downtown spaces, just to upgrade that a little bit. I still like the dead end sign on Cemetery Road, though. That's always my favorite. I was so glad it was still here 30 years later.
Have we run through folks online?
Did anyone else on Zoom want to offer any thoughts? I don't see any more hands up.
All right. So thank you. Very good input. Let's go. You can switch back to the PowerPoint. Way down towards the end. And I'll just guess what I was going to say next. We'll see how well it aligns with the slide when it gets up there. So again, looking at the goals and objectives memo, I think the first thing I wanted to just kind of talk about is just starting kind of from the high level down, because I know it gets a little bit harder to track when we really get down into all the weeds, but yep, next slide I think is the one we're on, actually one after that. There we go. The goal topics. again, it's structured a little bit differently, you know, than your current TSP, although I think we tried to save kind of a lot of the spirit of it. So I guess the first question I've got is just, do you think if you look at the goal topics and the goal statements, do those feel like we've got the right things covered? Are you concerned that maybe there's a gap? And for a little bit more detail, I'll read the goal statements for each of the main topics. So under safety, it was improve the safety of the transportation system for all users. I mean, safety is usually a pretty sure catch-all. It's probably going to be in all the plans. Active transportation, as I use that term to make sure everybody's knows we're talking about the same thing. I'm talking about walking and biking modes of transportation. Sometimes people throw transit into there. I don't, because most of my transit trips are sitting. That's mine. Well, transit's generally covered somewhere else in here. So maybe it's walking and biking trips. So it's complete safe networks of facilities that make walking and biking an attractive choice by people of all ages and abilities. And again, you know, just a few years ago, the city did an active transportation plan. And our intention is really to pull all that stuff into the TSP update. It technically already is. It was adopted as an extension of the TSP, but now we'll get it all into one document. So we think generally we probably have a lot of that as far as the projects covered, except that we do need to extend them a bit into a lot of the new growth areas. But again, it's usually a pretty important goal area.
So the active transportation plan has your street grid that shows what, you know, and those will match up, right, with the, because right now they don't match with our transportation plan. For example, Eagle Creek Road, you know, the active transportation plan says there's going to be 6 bike, you know, and then when you look at what that road is classified in the transportation plan now, they don't. It's not the same.
Oh, like the street standard diagram is different. Yeah. So the active transportation plan would override what's in your TSP. Yes.
But the new one will have it, so it's all new.
Yes. Mobility and accessibility. And again, this one, it's a mix of a few things. It's generally kind of your auto transportation's in here, but a lot of the transit stuff is in here as well, if you're looking at the objectives. But this one's promote efficient travel that provides access to goods, services, community facilities, homes, and employment to meet the daily needs of all users, as well as to local and regional activity centers. Goal 4 is equity. And that was support an equitable transportation system that justly allocates the benefits and burdens of transportation projects, policies, plans, and processes. We've got an environmental goal. And this is minimize environmental impacts on natural resources and encourage carbon neutral or efficient transportation alternatives. The health goal is support options for exercise and healthy lifestyles to enhance the quality of life. You will note, especially as you get into the objectives, you're going to see some redundancy and overlap in some of these objectives, because at some level, there's a lot of common ground between some of these goals, and that's okay as long as you're comfortable with it. It's not a problem to have a little bit of redundancy. Capital investments and funding. So this is promote cost-effective investments to the transportation system. And then the last goal area on here is regional coordination. And it's coordinate with other jurisdictions to plan and fund projects that better connect Estacada with the region and are consistent with local, regional, and state plans. So thinking about the things that we just talked about as far as what you wanted to accomplish. I don't know, does anyone have any kind of thoughts on just that structure? Does it sound like we kind of have the main topics of interest as far as goals covered? Or do you have any questions about where maybe something you're interested might fit to make sure we've kind of got a home?
So as far as width of streets, that sort of thing, that's under safety probably?
That is. Oh, it depends on what you're getting at with that one. If I think there is an objective in here, and I can't remember which category it's under, because I could probably justify throwing it under one or two. But if it's like, is it, when you say safety, is that specifically kind of getting back to like a ability to get emergency response vehicles
Yeah,
through, or?
somebody else online spoke to
Yeah.
it, and then my comment was related to, we put a park in, but then it's just so crowded because of the narrow streets.
I am almost certain that something along those lines is in the objectives.
All right.
We'll see. And that's part of the reason I wanted to kind of more generally get all the feedback from you and what you want to accomplish. Because one thing we're going to do is go back and look at this list and make sure we've got everything captured in our objectives. So don't have any gaps.
We've got a hand raised on Zoom. Dave?
I don't see anything, and maybe I'm just missing it, on economic development. And I'm wondering if that's an appropriate goal or objective. To me, it is, but it may not be for the TSP. Just throw that out.
It can be, and I know I've had those in other TSPs. I think for this one, we didn't make it a goal area, but there's some objectives related to it that probably got tucked under like accessibility and other goal areas. So that's another option as you look through this. We could split that out into its own and just move those things into it, or you can tuck the objectives into existing ones. I don't know. Thoughts from the group. Would you like to see that split out?
Could you clarify on that one? What would that mean? What would that look like?
It could include a variety of things. I think one is under objective 3.8 under mobility and accessibility. It's like manage arterials to support freight and the efficient movement of goods and services. I know also objective 3.4 under goal 3, which is the mobility and accessibility, was improve walkability in the downtown area to promote economic activity, which I think is one we took from the downtown plan. So we could split it out and like move those to it, or kind of leave them tucked under another goal.
From my standpoint, I like that they are included in there, so I'm fine with that. Dave, how do you feel about that? Hearing that there's a couple things in there already, just under some different goals.
Well, I think that's fine. I guess I feel if it's separated, there's more focus on it and there's more chance to be more inclusive. And the thing that comes to mind, for instance, is enhancing our recreation improvements, transportation improvements to enhance the recreational ability. It seems to fit in, economic development seems to fit in with the city goals. So I think the more focus that can be put on it, the better.
Yeah, we can split it out. I said
Well, that's just my preference. I don't know about anybody else.
Would that be like a economic development and tourism category? Would those two kind of go together? Or?
Yeah,
Would it-
I would
those
probably
things?
recommend that, yeah.
And you said there's some crossover in some other ones like active transportation and health. Maybe something like that could be combined or parsed out that we could have the same number of goals, but maybe shift some towards economic development and combine a couple here as well too, just as a thought.
Yeah, and I was like the health goal, some communities really want that one specifically spelled out separately, but inevitably you'll see there's a lot of overlap with, safety or active transportation. Or maybe if the recreation ones, if we're going to move those into the economic development, probably a lot of overlap. So it doesn't have to be separate.
I have a comment on active transportation that also involves economic development, safety, modes of transportation. I know we've talked about walking, we've talked about biking, but we haven't really talked about like paddling, which is a mode of transportation. And I know it seems kind of fringe here, but when you talk about safety and you talk about economic development and tourism, you have a really big draw here, which is Estacada Lake. It's a very, I wouldn't call it underutilized anymore. It's it's more well known than it used to be, but you wouldn't really know it's there I don't know if you need to really get that out to folks. I think social media has done a pretty good job of that and the city's done a good job. But when you start talking about safety and mixed use, just like you would for walking and biking on roads, you have mixed use on that lake. And so we get a lot of feedback. We've had incidences about the conflicts between modes of transportation. If you're to go down to that lake on a Saturday or Sunday and you're paddling a non-motorized watercraft and you have loads and loads of these things all over the lake, and then you have somebody that comes down there with a wakeboard boat or a big jet boat or whatever, there is no restrictions on that lake at all. You can look this up on the Oregon State Marine Board website. They're the ones that decide what happens on bodies of water and make restrictions. But what I can tell you, it's a matter of time until there's an accident on that lake. We've seen close calls, and in order to change that designation, it requires a petition to the Oregon State Marine Board, which I've considered through our business, but I know that the impact on our business could be very negative. So I don't know if I'm willing to do it. I've thought about addressing it to some nonprofits, but maybe that would be an interest of this group to talk about and think about, what does that use look like long-term? What is, how has it changed? How has the use changed percentage-wise? And what makes sense long-term for transportation on that lake, whether it's recreation or just out getting exercise? I know people go out there and swim that lake, and so I often get feedback from folks about that. And I tell them there is no restriction on that lake, and they're kind of dumbfounded because of the size of the lake and the narrowness of the lake. Most people don't. I have calls all the time that people say, oh, I'm going to Estacada Lake because they don't allow motorboats. That's absolutely not the case. It's actually the opposite. If you were to look at restrictions on the Clackamas River below Estacada, it's got restrictions. If you were to look at most any other lakes around, there are some type of restriction to make sure safety is key. And I do think it's time that the city or some kind of an organization gets behind the idea of what the future of mixed use on that lake should be.
All right, thank you.
I don't know if that fits in this category, but I do know a couple people now at Oregon State Marine Board, so maybe I can reach out to them and find out how to start that initiative.
So that conversation has come up through the PG, meetings that we do, the biannual meetings, and they've already told, they vocalized it in those meetings that even the Oregon State Marine Board officers and the Marine Board are behind a change, but nothing started to happen yet. And so I think what it's going to require is a group of individuals or entities that basically push that forward. I know it has the support of the state park. I know it has support from PGE. I know it has support from most of the recreators around here, minus a few holdout old school motorboaters that like to rip up and down that lake, and nothing against them, but at some point, like, change is demanded by usage. And I think the time is kind of now to take a look at that and see what's appropriate.
Where do they put in over at McIver?
They put it at Milo McIver.
And is Milo McIver okay with it? This the state, you said state parks is okay with the
Well,
change?
I mean, they don't want to say you can't have a motorboat there because the
Uh-huh.
Oregon State Marine Board helps fund that access site over
Oh,
there.
gotcha.
And so there is the idea that, they don't want to restrict motorboats altogether. And I don't think that's what you would want to ask for. I think what you would want to
Like
ask
a
for.
5 mile an hour.
5 mile an
speed
hour,
limit.
no tow, that sort of thing.
So they can fish.
So
you can-
fishing boats.
So you can
can
still
go.
get up to the other end and go, it's gonna require some enforcement, which they don't have a lot of. But I think the other thing that really makes sense about it is you do have the North Fork very close that has a
No, I
great
agree that
motorboat zone,
there's-
so.
I would say no, but
I would say the same thing, but if I say that too loud, I will probably get my window spray painted in our business, so I'll let you guys say that, and I'll just, hang.
Well, yeah, we'll see what we can do to carry that forward, even if that isn't this group necessarily, but yeah, I think that's a good point. To bring up on multimodal. ways of getting up and down the river.
And signage definitely though, because you're gonna be working on signage on, you know, where you.
Mhm.
I'm gonna do a quick reverse time check. Is there aren't any members of the public in attendance? I have got a public comment period of 10 minutes at the end for anyone that wanted to speak, but I don't know that there's anyone from the public that wanted to speak. And if not, I was gonna absorb their time.
No public attendees.
All right. This can get to be a bit much, but I was gonna try to kind of quickly read through overview what the objectives are under these goals. So maybe you can tell me, if something is not resonating with you, or if you're identifying some of that overlap, you think something should be relocated, let me know what you think. I will also say, this is somewhat of a living document in that, we see something's not working at some point in the process, right? We can tweak it. And, as we get to the point where, evaluating the projects using this, you're not stuck with the outcome after that first run through. If we look at it, you still have complete freedom for manual adjustments to look at it and go, no, I think we missed something here. This project should be higher priority for these reasons. And so, but hopefully this will get us, pretty close. So, to make sure you understand the stakes here. Doesn't have to be perfect. So under the safety goal, I'm just gonna look at the objectives here. We've got, apply a comprehensive approach to improving transportation safety through education, enforcement, and engineering strategies. Again, it's just not putting all of your baskets into just infrastructure. A lot of outreach and education programs can be very helpful. Proactively improve areas where crash risk factors are present. The traditional version of this one, I think might be in your current TSP, has something more along the lines of like telling the city that they need to monitor crash data and go out and address issues. The problem is most cities, especially smaller ones, really don't have the resources to do that. And so it just doesn't happen. So this one's a little bit more practical where where it says improve crash risk factors, it's a bit more qualitative. So it's areas where you're getting a lot of complaints or of issues like maybe the 6th and Main corner you just improved that was really wide. That would fit under there. Provide safe pedestrian and bike routes between residential areas, schools, and public facilities. Provide transportation design and connectivity standards that encourage appropriate traffic volumes and speeds, enhance pedestrian safety, and improve emergency service response time and evacuation routes. That's kind of getting to the design issue. Reduce the frequency of crashes and strive to eliminate crashes resulting in serious injuries and fatalities. And the last one is apply traffic calming measures to support neighborhood livability. Any thoughts on that before I move to the next section? So active transportation. This one's got provide safe and accessible pedestrian and bicycle routes to major destinations in the city. Create an active transportation network that serves a broad variety of users from the reluctant to the fearless. Improve accessibility to transit services for people arriving by foot, by bicycle, or with a mobility device. Address challenging street crossing locations along major routes for people walking and biking. Support safe neighborhood connections to schools via walking and biking. Progressively close gaps in the existing sidewalk network. And the last one is continuously improve existing transportation facilities to meet applicable City of Estacada and Americans with Disabilities Act standards.
I've got a comment / question. Could we talk a little bit about how this group can or will inform the identification of those major destinations in the city? The first point that you noted was, I think, providing bike routes, making sure that there's that bike routes provide access to those major destinations. Yeah, how are we gonna decide what those are? Slash where they will be,
Yeah,
over the next 20 years.
that's probably at the next meeting, because I know as part of the memo we're putting together about existing conditions and kind of what's working, what doesn't, it identifies key destinations. They're maps. I think a lot of that we took from the active transportation plan from a few years ago, where we had mapped out what we're calling key destinations. So we at least have a starter for that. We can certainly adjust.
So that's something that they can respond to and add to or contest.
So it was, as we go through here again, think about those things that we talked about and make sure the important issue you had is captured somewhere. So the third one, mobility and accessibility. So we've got provide an interconnected network of streets to allow for efficient travel, manage congestion according to adopted mobility standards, support transportation options for people of all ages and abilities, improve walkability in the downtown area to promote economic activity, collaborate with transportation agencies, and support expansions of transit service and user-friendly connections, increase public awareness of local transit providers by Sandy Transit and TriMet and their connectivity to other transit systems and transportation modes. Provide access to key employment centers, residential areas, and key community facilities, including parks and schools, and manage arterials to support freight and the efficient movement of goods and services. And I would think that, while I don't know specifically how it is in here, but when I will make sure it's captured, is I think the issue that was brought up about getting access to transit, when you need that, say, shuttle ride, right? The on-demand ride, if you're outside of the service area, should be captured in here. I think this would be the goal, probably where it would fit well. On equity, I've got consider the potential positive and negative impacts of transportation projects and programs on historically underrepresented and underserved communities to strive to achieve a just allocation of investments. Improve accessibility to resources and essential destinations such as education, employment, food, healthcare, emergency and public services, and social and recreational activities for historically underrepresented and underserved communities. Seek to improve transportation options and affordability. Provide multifaceted, accessible, and inclusive public engagement process that considers a wide range of lived experiences and provides all community members an opportunity to provide input on transportation system decisions. And the last one is make transportation land use related data used for transportation planning available to the public in a form they can use. The environmental goal, minimize environmental impacts on natural resources, encourage carbon neutral or efficient transportation alternatives was the goal. We've got 5 objectives. It's avoid or mitigate transportation project impacts to environmental resources, including creeks and wetlands, cultural resources, and wildlife corridors. Protect scenic resources in Estacada. Encourage transportation facility design and construction methods that reduce environmental impacts. Support access to alternative fuel sources, and support strategies that encourage a reduction in trips made by single occupant vehicles. You can stop me at any time. Health, develop a connected network of inviting walking and biking facilities, including off-street trails that complement access routes to employment, housing, schools, and shopping and transit. I think that was one that we pulled more or less from the active transportation work, where folks didn't want to just rely on like sidewalk bike lanes. They wanted to kind of have a redundant recreational routes as well. Provide walking facilities that are physically separated from auto traffic on all arterials and collectors. and provide facilities that connect the public to the Riverside area and other recreational opportunities. And then under the capital investments and funding, preserve and maintain existing transportation facilities to extend their useful life. Seek to improve the efficiency of existing transportation facilities before adding capacity. Seek opportunities to combine transportation projects with other infrastructure and environmental mitigation projects. And identify and develop diverse and stable funding sources to implement transportation projects in a timely fashion and ensure sustained funding for transportation projects and maintenance. Oh, I've got two more. Minimize street cross sections to reduce maintenance costs. And maintain transportation system development charges at a level that results in an equitable development contribution to city transportation capital improvement projects.
What was that one about minimizing the cross section?
Minimize street cross sections to reduce maintenance costs.
We were just talking about
Again,
not
it's the-
making the streets too narrow.
Yeah, it's
It's a
the
balance.
other side of
though.
the coin there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right, they have to be maintained if we make them wider, but I don't know, how do you feel about that? I mean, I guess it's a good objective. It makes me nervous though, when we say we want one thing and then we make an objective that kind of,
Yeah, I can see both sides of that. Part of it is obviously we need to find a design that is, I think, making sure that that corridor can serve the intended uses, right? And address the emergency access needs. At the same time, I would encourage you not to go, crazy and just make it really wide to make sure it can fit everything, right? So I think you still want to find that,
right,
be economical and as far as the cost, right? The maintenance needs, the environmental impact, but at the same time, make sure it's fitting your needs.
Can we just change minimize to evaluate street cross sections to reduce maintenance costs?
that's more conservative. Yeah.
We can.
Like, could you read the last bullet point on environmental also? If we go back.
Yeah, maintain transportation system development charges at a level that results in an equitable development contribution to city transportation capital improvement projects.
Okay, it wasn't that one.
Environmental.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm jumping back, sorry.
Last one, environmental, support strategies that encourage a reduction in trips made by single occupant vehicles.
Which is what we're trying to do by walking and biking.
A lot of
But-
ways to get at that one.
And zoning, so little stores can be closer to bigger neighborhoods.
Okay, that makes sense, yes. Cause I feel like we all have like our own personal little
think
mobility
we
machine and,
That rezoning out on the highway to make it so there could be a barber shop and a small
Mhm.
store, so people in the north could not have to come clear.
they wouldn't have to drive down here, they could just walk or. Yeah.
Another example is, we have code provisions for providing, in certain circumstances, providing like a carpool parking space, carpool, van pool, or whatever to encourage, car ride sharing.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Thank you.
So before you move on again, because Melanie took us backwards,
did.
under environmental, there was something about construction methods or something, maybe the second one.
Encourage transportation facility design and construction methods that reduce environmental impacts.
Yeah. So I think we're all supportive of being good stewards of the environment. Sometimes when that goes to an excess, it just raises costs quite substantially. So I don't know if there's just a way to make sure that we're not moving so far down that environmental track that we price ourselves out of projects because we're trying to do this other thing. So I don't know if there's a way to balance that. It's no different than what Melanie just said. We have these competing goals often in transportation. We want to encourage more pedestrians, and yet at the same time, we want to make the streets drivable. So just balancing those, just point in case, yes.
Yeah, and sometimes it could be if, like I said, knowing there are going to be competing objectives. I think if you leave the language open enough so that city council can make those decisions at the appropriate time about how best to balance those objectives. It's maybe the wise ways to go. Like this is encourage transportation, you know, so since it's not demanding you must always choose that route. So you have the flexibility that like, whereas you'll certainly be reminded that you should be considering that, but if there's some reason it's justified to go a different route because of those competing objectives, you still can.
Right, back on track. Sorry about that.
We're just down to the required ones now. Regional coordination, which I think these are probably all things you are going to do and need to do anyway. So it's coordinate projects, policy issues, and development actions with all affected government agencies in the area. Build support with regional partners for the improvement of regional connections. Coordinate the development of the city's transportation system plan with transportation policies and plans of Clackamas County and the Oregon Department of Transportation. And ensure consistency of transportation planning with other community planning efforts related to land use, housing, economic development, natural resource planning, and other related efforts. So generally sound like good ideas, and most of those I think you're required to do anyway. So from what I'm hearing is we're probably generally on the right track here. We'll split out economic development into a separate one and maybe just move some of these out. It sounded like maybe the health as a separate goal was probably not necessary. It's like people could take or leave that. So if we're moving things around, we find out that we've just stole everything from the health one, then we could just get rid of it.
So can I clarify, hanging on to those objectives that are currently under health and
Yes,
parking
all of
them
the
elsewhere?
objectives would still be somewhere.
Right, okay,
Yes.
great.
And then, like I said, is we'll certainly go back through all the feedback you gave us on what you wanted to accomplish and see if we need to supplement this to make sure we're capturing it. And then what I would suggest is we'll kind of do a track changes version of this. So you can see how we modified this version from what you previously had based on today's conversation, and just send that back to you. So you can send us back any comments you would like, but at that point, and then our next step is our city council briefing, and we'll certainly be sharing this with them and letting them know about the feedback that we got from this group.
And that is a public meeting. You would be welcome to attend and observe. You wouldn't be participating, but that's on the 25th this month.
All right. So with that said, I think we've gotten through everything. Sort of big introduction here. So like I said, we are already well underway in kind of our assessment of the existing transportation system. We'll be forecasting out what we think that looks like 20 years from now, and that's our next big deliverable that will be coming your way. And the focus of a lot of the next meeting is just about, what are we seeing, what needs to be addressed, right? Where are the real big gaps, and what kinds of solutions you want us to look at as we move forward to address those. We don't have a date picked for that yet, but Ed, could you go back quickly if you could find in my PowerPoint? Too late.
My computer decided to restart on its own.
It's happening right at 5 p.m.
It's all right. It's probably a couple months away would be my guess. Visualize actually the concept schedule I showed you, it's on the project website, so you can go see it there. And as we start to get clarity on when we want to do this, we'll be sending out meeting invite for that. All right, any parting words from anybody?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you. All right. Enjoy the rest of the day, which is probably really warm, 95 degrees still, so.